Poland and Ukraine are fighting, and it's about more than a medal. So, Poland and Ukraine are in the middle of what might be their worst diplomatic falling out in years. And it all started with a military unit getting a new name. I know that sounds a little absurd, and on the surface, it kind of is. But if you pull back the camera a little bit, what's actually happening here is much more interesting and much more important than a spat over medals and symbols. Today, I want to walk you through exactly what happened, why it escalated so fast, what it reveals about both countries, and honestly, what it says about how Poland has been conducting its foreign policy for years. Because I think that's the part most people are missing. Let's get into it. Alright, so what actually happened? Here's the sequence of events. Back in late May, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky signed a decree granting an elite Ukrainian Special Operations Unit the honorary title Heroes of the UPA. The UPA means Ukrainian Insurgent Army. It was a World War II era nationalist force that fought for Ukrainian independence. Now, in Ukraine, the UPA is widely viewed as a symbol of resistance against the Soviets, against the Nazis, and against Moscow's domination. They are heroes. You see them in street names, in monuments, in national memory. In Poland, the picture is completely different. For Poland, the UPA is inseparable from the Volhynia massacres, a series of brutal killings between 1943 and 1945 in which Polish civilians were targeted and killed by Ukrainian nationalists in what is now Western Ukraine. Poland puts the death toll at around 100,000 people. These weren't battlefield casualties. These were villages, families, a wound that has never fully healed in Polish historical memory. So when Zelensky named a military unit after UPA heroes, even if the intention was purely about honoring soldiers fighting Russia today, Warsaw reacted immediately and sharply. Polish President Karol Nawrocki had actually been sitting on the decision for nearly 2 weeks, apparently hoping Zelensky would quietly walk it back. He didn't. So on June 19th, Nawrocki announced he was revoking Poland's highest state honor, the Order of the White Eagle, from the Ukrainian president. And then things moved fast. Zelensky responded by literally mailing the medal back. He posted a photo of it being packaged up and sent to Warsaw, with a pointed message noting that the Order of the White Eagle has also been awarded to, among others, Catherine the Great of Russia, who initiated the first partition of Poland, Benito Mussolini, and former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder, who is widely known for his close ties to the Kremlin. His message was essentially, if those people can keep their medals, don't lecture me about values. And it didn't stop there. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, Defense Intelligence Chief Kyrylo Budanov, and Ukrainian Ambassador to Poland Vasyl Bodnar all returned their Polish decorations in solidarity. Then three former Ukrainian presidents, Kuchma, Yushchenko, and Poroshenko, announced they were giving back their orders of the White Eagle too. That's a remarkable escalation, and it happened within about 48 hours. The historical fault line. Now, I want to spend a moment on the historical dimension here because I think it's easy to dismiss this as politicians being dramatic, and that would be a mistake. The Volhynia massacres are genuinely one of the most painful chapters in modern Polish Ukrainian relations. Poland has officially described them as genocide. Ukraine has not used that term. And that difference in what you call something in whether you acknowledge it the same way has been a persistent source of tension for decades. What makes this moment particularly charged is that Ukraine is in the middle of a war for its survival, and it is leaning heavily into its national identity and its nationalist historical symbols as part of that fight. That's understandable. When a country is fighting to exist, it reaches for everything that says, "We are a people, we have always fought to be free, and we will not stop now." But those same symbols land very differently across the border. What's notable is that Navrotsky reportedly waited almost 2 weeks before acting, giving Zelensky time to reverse the unit naming. The fact that Zelensky didn't suggests this wasn't an oversight or a miscalculation on Kiev's part. Ukraine is making a deliberate choice about its own historical narrative, and it's not willing to have that narrative dictated by Warsaw. The bigger problem: Poland's missing strategy. Here's where I want to zoom out because I think the most interesting part of this story isn't the conflict itself, it's what the conflict reveals. Poland has been one of Ukraine's most committed and generous supporters since Russia's full scale invasion began. It has taken in millions of Ukrainian refugees, more than any other country. It's been a transit hub for weapons. It has lobbied hard within the EU and NATO for Ukraine's interests. Poland's support has been real, substantial, and costly. And yet, Poland never really defined what it wanted in return. Think about that for a second. Countries don't have friends, they have interests. That's basically a first week lesson in any international relations class. But Poland for years has supported Ukraine in a way that was heavy on solidarity and very light on clearly stated national interest. The historical issues, the UPA, Volhynia, the question of official Ukrainian acknowledgement of what happened to Polish civilians, these were largely kept off the public table. Anyone who tried to raise them was accused of being anti Ukrainian or playing into Russia's hands. The debate was effectively suppressed. So, what happened? Poland gave and gave and gave without ever having a serious public conversation about what it expected, what its red lines were, or what role it saw itself playing as Ukraine moved closer to European structures. And now, when Poland finally raises one of these historical issues, even in a symbolic, relatively restrained way, it's caught flat footed because there was no framework, no clear strategy, no defined national interest to fall back on. Zelensky's response wasn't really about the medal. His response, calm, pointed, a little contemptuous, essentially said, "You've never pushed back on us seriously before. Why start now?" And he's not entirely wrong. The real politic case: why Poland actually had leverage and didn't use it. Now I want to push this analysis even further because there's a harder, more uncomfortable argument that I think deserves to be made clearly. Poland didn't just fail to define its interests, it failed to recognize and use the very real power it had, and the window for using it may now be closing. Here's the thing: in the early stages of the war, Ukraine was genuinely existentially dependent on Poland, not just emotionally, not just symbolically, structurally. Poland was the logistical corridor, the refugee processing hub, the political voice in Brussels and Washington. Without Poland's active cooperation, Ukraine's situation would have been dramatically worse. That is leverage, real, concrete leverage, and Poland never used it. Now, some people would say, of course, Poland shouldn't have used it. Ukraine was fighting for its life. This was a moral obligation. You don't bargain with someone's survival. And I understand that instinct. But here's the counter argument: Ukraine wasn't fighting for Poland's benefit. Ukraine was fighting because if it didn't fight, it would cease to exist as a state. That's a very different thing. Ukraine would have fought regardless of what Poland did or didn't demand. The war was happening because Ukraine had no other option. That means Poland's support, while genuinely important, was not Ukraine's only lifeline, and Poland was not in the same existential position as Ukraine. If Ukraine lost this war, Ukraine ceases to exist. If Poland made a miscalculation in this relationship, Poland would face serious difficulties, but Poland would survive. That asymmetry matters enormously. It means that in any negotiation, Poland actually had more room to make demands than it ever exercised. What could Poland have asked for? Technology transfers, contracts for post war reconstruction, access to Ukrainian mineral resources, formal meaningful acknowledgement of the Volhynia massacres, a defined role in Ukraine's EU integration process. The list isn't short. Instead, Poland converted its position of real influence into what amounted to unconditional support, and unconditional support in the world of international relations earns you very little, not because the other side is ungrateful by nature, but because there's simply no incentive to give you anything when you've already given everything for free. There's an analogy here that's worth thinking about. Imagine you're the most important person in someone's professional network. You've helped them get their job, vouched for them repeatedly, opened doors for them. Now imagine you never asked for anything in return, never mentioned any of your own needs, and just kept helping. At some point, that dynamic stops looking like friendship and starts looking like dependency from your side. The other person moves forward, you stay where you were. And when you finally do ask for something, the response is surprise, not gratitude. That's roughly where Poland finds itself right now. What this tells us about Ukraine. There's also something worth noting about Ukraine here because the response from Kiev was fast, coordinated, and very deliberate. Zelensky didn't apologize. He didn't try to quietly smooth things over. He mailed the medal back and posted the photo. His foreign minister, his intelligence chief, his ambassador, and three former presidents all returned their Polish decorations within 48 hours. There is not a panicked response, there is a calculated one. Ukraine has been navigating global diplomacy at an extraordinarily intense level for over 4 years now. Zelensky speaks to heads of state constantly. Ukraine has a very clear sense of what it wants: membership in NATO, membership in the EU, security guarantees, continued military support, and it's pursuing those goals with remarkable focus and discipline. This isn't a new development. Analysts who were watching closely noted early in the war that Zelensky operates in a very specific way on the international stage. He presents Ukraine's case as emotionally compelling and morally urgent, and he's very good at it. The appeal to Western allies, the appearances before parliaments, the constant requests for more weapons and more money, it's a deliberately crafted strategy, and it has worked enormously well. But there's a flip side to that. The same approach that's extremely effective in a room full of sympathetic allies can come across as dismissive of partners who expect to be treated as equals. Biden's team reportedly expressed frustration with Zelensky more than once. Trump's team has been openly contemptuous at times. The framing of "we are fighting for all of Europe, so you owe us" is persuasive up to a point, and then it stops being persuasive and starts generating resentment. Ukraine also knows that Poland needs this relationship too. Poland is Ukraine's neighbor, its most important advocate in Brussels and Washington, its logistical backbone, so Kiev can push back hard knowing that Warsaw is unlikely to actually withdraw its support over a dispute about medals. That's not cynicism. That's just how international relations work, and Ukraine, forged by years of war, understand this very well. The Gdańsk conference and what comes next. The timing here makes this worse than it might otherwise be. Because in just a few days, on June 25th, the Ukraine Recovery Conference is scheduled to take place in Gdańsk, Poland. This is a major European event about rebuilding Ukraine after the war. Zelensky's participation now looks very uncertain, and the conference itself has come under a cloud. There's a kind of cruel irony in the fact that Poland, which has arguably done more than almost any other country to support Ukraine, is now hosting a conference for Ukraine's future at the exact moment their relationship has hit its lowest point in years. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Sybiha called Nawrocki's decision a strategic mistake from which only Moscow benefits. And look, from a Ukrainian perspective, that framing makes sense. You want to keep Poland inside the tent, fully committed, no daylight. But from a Polish perspective, the question is, at what point does a country get to raise its own historical grievances without being told it's doing Russia's work? That's a genuinely hard question, and it doesn't have an easy answer. Here's something important though. It's not too late for Poland to change how it plays this. The leverage hasn't completely evaporated. Poland is still Ukraine's most strategically significant neighbor in the EU. The reconstruction of Ukraine, which will require enormous investment, logistical coordination, and political support, is still ahead of us. Poland still has cards. But using those cards requires something that Polish policy has struggled with, a willingness to approach this relationship not through the lens of historical solidarity and emotion, but through the lens of clearly defined national interest. That means knowing what you want, saying it out loud, and being prepared to make the relationship conditional on getting some of it. So, where does this leave us? In the short term, a damaged relationship, a major conference in Gdańsk that may or may not come off as planned, and both sides trying to signal strength without completely torching the bridge. In the medium term, this forces a conversation that Poland probably should have been having for years. What does Poland actually want from its relationship with Ukraine? What are the non negotiable historical issues? What does Poland expect if and when Ukraine enters the EU? And how does that change Poland's own role in European politics? These are serious questions. They deserve serious debate, not shouting matches between politicians, not accusations of being pro or anti Ukraine, but a real grounded strategic discussion about what Poland's national interest actually is. The core lesson here isn't complicated, even if it's uncomfortable. Building a foreign policy on emotion rather than interest doesn't make you a good ally. It makes you a predictable one. And predictable, unconditional allies don't get respect, they get taken for granted. That's not a criticism of caring about Ukraine's survival. Caring about it is entirely reasonable. But caring about something and having a strategy for it are two completely different things. And for too long, Poland has had the first without the second. Whether this episode finally changes that, or whether it dissolves into domestic political noise, is probably the most important question coming out of all of this. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, subscribe and drop a comment below. See you next time.